I'm Michael Denison, Research Director at Control Risks, and I'm joined at the Flame Conference of 2013 in Amsterdam by Professor Dieter Helm from Oxford University. Professor Helm, you're talking later today about climate change policy. Is the era of global climate change governance and initiatives really over?
Well, it's never really got going. If you look back to 1990, the base year, you'll see that emissions have grown continuously. In fact, they're increasing now at the end of that period. So the evidence is that nothing of substance whatsoever in nearly a quarter of a century has been achieved. And that's because the Kyoto architecture was designed as a European framework, and it doesn't have within it the framework for delivering anything of substance.
So what's the future? Is it national legislation?
Well, the question is that if you think that a top-down Kyoto-type framework is not going to work, and clearly at the Durban conference, when it was agreed that we would try by 2015 to work out what we might do by 2020, the evidence is there is it isn't going to work. You have to think of bottom-up approaches. And the only way that you can make a bottom-up approach work is if you tax carbon consumption rather than carbon production, and that means taxing carbon imports as well as domestic production. So you have to have a bottom-up carbon tax plus a border tax if you want to do it yourself without destroying your industry in the process.
How effective do you think a group of states, a sort of minilateral approach would be?
Well, the great thing about thinking about taxing carbon consumption, that's the carbon in what we use rather than what we produce, is that you can put together coalitions of the willing. The sad fact is that the one coalition of the willing that you might think might work, the Europeans have chosen exactly the wrong way to go about this problem.
You talk about Europe. Energy demand is fairly flat. We've got the on-streaming of shale, we've got LNG hitting the market in a big way. Where do you see the European energy scene over the next 5 years? What are the main dynamics there, do you think?
Well, Europe has to confront the fact that it's going to be, indeed is, extraordinarily energy poor, and some of that's of its own making. So if you look out over the next decade or so, you've got the United States with gas prices, a quarter of those in Europe, moving towards self-sufficiency and indeed a position of relative comfort and abundance. In Europe, shale gas is being banned while coal is being expanded. As an environmental policy, you couldn't think of anything worse. We're building lots of extremely expensive current renewables, which make very little difference to climate change, and we're not investing in the infrastructure necessary to develop the new gas supplies, including and very particularly the potential enormous supplies on our doorstep in North Africa.
We've both been to flame conferences many times in the past few years. A lot of the talk in 2009, 2010 surrounded energy security. Do you think that's still the same sort of pressing issue as it was in 2009-10 when the Russia-Ukraine disputes, for example, were extant?
Well, it depends what you mean by energy security. So we did have very particular threats from gas supplies from Russia over the last decade, and those haven't gone away. But what I think is the theme that emerges underneath this is not so much security as just poverty. The fact that Europe has put itself in the global economy in the least competitive position, and this is going to have significant impacts. Now, true, if we carry on as we are, we will reduce our carbon production because our industries will suffer. You know, the best way of reducing carbon emissions is reduce your output. But the reality going forward with mass unemployment in Europe, particularly youth unemployment, with very serious competitive positions, is to recognise that, you know, the United States has a 4-to-1 advantage in competition terms. And, you know, if you're a European industry, it's a big choice to decide to uproot and go to China. It's not such a big choice to uproot and go to America.
Thank you.